it's important to define what crime is and fix the punishment, right? That is important to to procedural justice, right? That's there has to be a clear expression or documentation of what the crime is and what the punishment is. Yeah, so that has to do with like substantive criminal law, right? And that's what our whole our case laws and our penal codes and gigantic law books are all about. It's giving all that substantive criminal law. As far as proving that a crime is committed, this is really important because this is actually falls to the law enforcement officer. So the person making the arrest, so the cop that ends up making the arrest, it's really on him to prove that a crime has actually been committed, right? The case will end up going to court, and the lawyers and all that will deal with it, but it's the cops or the officer's original arrest that's ends up being scrutinized because, hey, can they prove that an actual crime has been committed? And there's two components typically of most crimes that are required. And these are Latin words, right? Actus reus. Just think of act, right? Okay. Was the act actually committed? Okay. So is actually doing the thing. It's not like I thought about killing somebody. It's did you actually do it? Was the act completed? Okay. So there's the act. And then the other is the mens rea. And again, Latin. Men, think of like mental state, right? So, and that has to do with was their intent? Was it a complete accident? Was the person completely crazy and criminally, mentally insane, and so they can't really be held because they're just absolutely insane, right? And that's why you have you always hear in the movies of stories about like, oh, they're trying to get the insanity thing so that so their charges are lessened because, well, if they're insane, then they can't really be held responsible, right? But you have those two elements of proving that a crime has existed, right? And I thought I talked about that more somewhere else, but I don't have a slide. Okay. But anyway, so those are the 2 points. So you have the act and then the intent. And then obviously on the intent, you have, there's different degrees of that as well. Okay. Was it like deliberate, like deliberately intentional? Was it, there's negligent, right? Where you should have known that hitting that person in the face was going to hurt them, or something like that. There's like a negligence level. So there's different kind of levels of that mental state. But it's important to prove that there was intent to do the crime, as well as the act, not just the act itself. I talked about criminal and civil law, the difference. And this is fascinating in our country, and I love it. But basically, so crimes that has to do with criminal law, there's a public wrong, the state prosecutes, there's a seek to punish, criminal intent is required, right? A tort, which has to do more with like civil law, right? Is more like a private wrong. Individual prosecutes, seeks redress for injury, intent not necessary, right? So that might be something where, I'm trying to think of a good example of like civil law, but basically that's when people are like suing each other, right? I'm going to take you to court because your dog, jumped the fence to my house and ate, all my flowers and peed on my yard and terrorized my children or something like that, right? It's not a criminal law, but that's a private wrong. Hey, my neighbor did something against me. I want to seek redress. I want them to pay for my flowers to get fixed or whatever. It's a bad example. Sorry, I should have thought of a better one beforehand. But yeah, something like that, right? You're not going to call the cops necessarily because your neighbor's dog was barking or something like that, right? Or coming over your yard. But you might try to seek, and people actually do call the police on these things, and then it comes down to the law enforcement officer and the cop to mitigate that, like, hey, and that's where the cop has to determine, okay, hey, the crime really wasn't committed here, this is a civil issue that you guys need to resolve, and the cop could help try to mitigate that and resolve that issue and that problem, and a good cop will try to serve the public in that sense. But overall, there is a difference, and the cop needs to recognize, okay, this isn't a crime, they haven't done something guilty of a crime, that could be arrested for or prosecuted against. It's more of a civil issue. I think the most famous kind of issue between criminal and civil is the O.J. Simpson trial, or trials, I should say. And you guys are really young, but there is, a movie on Netflix. There's actually lots of, O.J. Simpson movies and lots of O.J. Simpson information. And actually my original plan for your final assignment was to watch the O.J. Made in America documentary that was put out by ESPN 30 for 30. Because it's really, really good. And it goes into such great detail. And I still might assign that as an option for your final, but I won't require all of you to do it because I can't get the video for free. And I can't require you guys to go buy the video. And I can't show it through Zoom or any kind of shared thing. So Diego says, I don't think OJ did it. That's good. That's good, Diego. Not a lot of people agree with you, but he was found innocent, right? OJ was found innocent criminally of killing his ex-wife Nicole and what's his name, her boyfriend. So he was criminally found innocent. There was not evidence. The jury decided there was not evidence beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was guilty of doing it. Right. So yeah. So he was let go. He was innocent. But afterwards, after all that, and again, can't be charged for double jeopardy, Fifth Amendment, right? Not allowed to charge him again for the same crime, even when more evidence was found. But what they ended up doing is the families of the victims ended up suing him civilly for basically the same thing, but it was a civil trial. And in the civil trial, they found him guilty of essentially of doing it, but not criminally, but civilly. And so really fascinating. And again, I don't have time to go into it now, but would love to assign that and talk more about it. If we had a longer class or even just more of like a constitutional law class, it'd be a lot more interesting to talk about that and go into detail. But really fascinating how there is a difference between criminal law, civil law. O.J. Simpson trials is a really good example of that because he was found innocent criminally, but he was found guilty civilly, ended up having to pay a lot of redress, right? Redress for the injury. He had to compensate for his actions and whatnot. So really interesting story there. And again, I'm going to see how I can incorporate it into this class later, but I don't think we have to. Civil Rights Act, super important. I'll probably end up touching again on this next week, but this came out in 1983. And this is basically allowing officers to be sued. So if in the course of me doing my job, I'm arresting you guys for something because you violated the law and you're guilty, no question about it. But if in the course of me arresting you and taking you to jail, I violate your constitutional rights, then I can be sued. So you can civilly sue me, right? You're not going to criminally bring a charge against me, but you could civilly bring a charge me and sue me, or more likely sue my department. Because if you sue me, I don't have a lot of money. You're not going to get much out of me. But if you sue my department that I represent, you could potentially get a lot of money out of the department, right? And that's essentially what Breonna Taylor's family did that we just talked about recently. Was the family sued the officers. The officers haven't been charged with the crime. So as of yet, the officers that ended up shooting her and killing her, they were doing their job, even though it seems like they did not do their job well. They technically were doing their job, and so they're probably protected from criminal charges of killing her. But civilly, they were definitely found. They probably would have been found to need to, and that's why the department ended up just settling. Like, hey, here's $12 million. Let's settle. We don't need to go to trial. We don't need to go to civil trial. We'll just lay it at rest there, and save everybody from the hassle of years of in court going back and forth and all this stuff. So that's why they settled. And that's a lot of things. Usually, lawsuits against police or police departments usually do get settled, and the department just ends up paying out because they don't want to just fight it. It's just that, it's one of those interesting things within our criminal justice system. So that's something that happens more often than not, is just a settlement. But really interesting that happens. So that I have to be careful, right? In doing my job, just because I have the authority and the police power to to do things, that doesn't mean I can just step all over your rights. I can't just search you whenever I want. I can't go into your house, go through all your stuff, right? I have to respect your constitutional rights. And if I don't, then I can actually be sued, even though you did something illegal and are guilty. I still have to respect your rights. So really important, that Civil Rights Act of 1983, foundational to our criminal justice system. Really important to know about. Police power. The reality is police have to have power, right? Because having laws without any enforcement is pointless, right? The reality is some people would follow the law even if it wasn't a law, right? Even if there was no punishment. But consider, something as simple as like traffic laws, right? There's speed limits, right? And you know that if you drive faster than the speed limit, you're breaking the law and you can get a ticket. Or something as simple as if you go in the carpool lane, if you're by yourself, you can get a ticket and, it costs like $400 or $500, right? And there's punishment. And so the reason you consider, okay, so what's the reason people don't drive too fast and don't drive in the carpool lane when they're not supposed to? Do they do it because they're just good people and they think that's the right thing to do? Maybe, but more likely they probably just do it because they don't want to get caught and pay hundreds of dollars in tickets, right? So it's really that fear of punishment is what keeps them honest. Because I'll tell you what, like if there's no punishment for driving too fast, I wouldn't drive the speed limit. I'm perfectly happy going 85, 90 miles an hour. I'm a good driver. I feel like a safe driver. I could do that, no problem, and I'd be perfectly happy with it. I don't do that because why? I don't want to get a ticket. I don't have an extra $400, $500 sitting around to just give to the government because I drove too fast, right? So that's why there has to be enforcement of the law. Because without enforcement, the law is powerless and doesn't do anything. So that's why we have police power. And I think one of the funniest examples of that we're going through now is with this whole with the whole pandemic. The mask wearing. Okay. Is it illegal to go into, to go places without a mask on now? In some places it is, right? In LA County especially, you're not allowed to go do anything without a mask on. But what do you see if you guys go out? Do you see everybody wearing a mask? I don't, right? San Diego, there's a lot of people not wearing masks down there, right? A lot of people not wearing masks. I went to Laguna Beach a couple weeks ago, and there's a ton of people not wearing masks. Why? Because nothing's really going to happen. Somebody might say, hey, you should wear a mask. Like, okay, but there's no real enforcement of that law. And so without enforcement, people aren't really going to follow the law. So enforcement is important. And that's why police have power to enforce laws, right? And that power comes from the Constitution. It comes from the Supreme Court decisions, federal statutes, state constitution, state statutes. All these areas that are listed here is where the police power comes from. So it is legitimate that police have authority and have power to enforce laws. And it's essential within our society that police do have that power. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I've talked way too much. So let me stop the recording. And if you guys have any questions, let's hit it.